This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Jeff Timmer. Welcome to the 1984 episode of A Republic, if you can keep it.
The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, pure power. Power is not a means. It is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power.
The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. George Orwell wrote those words 76 years ago in his famous post-apocalyptic dystopian future novel, 1984, seemingly the operating manual for Donald Trump's administration. In fact, Trump used those exact words in a previous campaign speech and has lived by them ever since.
I'm Mark Brewer. In another prescient moment, George Orwell also wrote, "Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right."
Mark, you sound like a Republican there. Every day is an exercise in taking attention away from the growing cover-up of the Epstein files and Trump's financial corruption, with Trump apparently terrified that his sordid decades-long history of sexually predatory behavior will finally catch up with him.
America today is a sharp contrast to what we've seen in South Korea and Brazil, where they held their insurrectionist presidents accountable, and both are on their way or in jail. And the same thing is true of England, where Andrew, formerly known as Prince, celebrated his 66th birthday in custody, as England actually holds the powerful accountable, including its monarchy. While here in the United States, Epstein's home country, the White House continues to cover up the crimes of the rich and powerful and be the home of an insurrectionist president.
Case in point, the Department of Justice spoke 4 separate times to a woman who credibly accused Donald Trump of having sex with a 13-year-old he met through Jeffrey Epstein. But most accusations against the president appear to have been removed from the government's documents on the alleged sex trafficker.
And a part of Trump's defense is also right out of 1984. He who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. That means silencing his critics, including the late-night comedians who, in the tradition of Will Rogers, lampoon him nonstop. But the tactic is backfiring. Kimmel's banishment lasted only a few days, and Stephen Colbert has become even more focused in the last few weeks of his days on CBS. The made-for-YouTube video of Colbert with Texas Senate candidate James Tallarico has already racked up more than 7.5 million views, which has tripled Colbert TV show ratings. And Tallarico has raised a staggering $2.5 million in the day following the incident.
Trump wants everything possible named after him. Now he apparently wants to profit from those efforts as well. His company has filed papers to trademark the use of his name at airports, even as his Florida fans in the state legislature pass a bill to rename the Palm Beach International Airport in his honor, and he pressures Congress to rename Dulles Airport near Washington. If signed into law, the Palm Beach International change would cost the airport $5.5 million to remake signs, uniforms, promotional products, equipment, and more, according to the Palm Beach County's Department of Airports. But Trump wants to profit from this personally through a trademark.
Trump did get a little nap time during the initial meeting of his made-up Institute for Peace this week, although he nodded off repeatedly in front of world leaders who had ponied up the $1 billion membership fee. However, before nap time, Trump pledged $10 billion from the United States to what amounts to his personal slush fund, ignoring, of course, the constitutional requirement that spending must be authorized by Congress.
Governor Whitmer attended the Munich International Security Conference And at the conference, she joined AOC and Trump's NATO ambassador and others on a panel discussion where she was highly critical of Trump's economic war with Canada that has driven our neighbors to the north to get cozy with China.
We are intertwined with Canada. Our economies are absolutely intertwined. And I can tell you that the hurt at the beginning has turned to anger and has created a lot of stress in our state economy. We're feeling it. And as we've said all along, if you say no to Canada, you're saying yes to China. And I think that same rationale can be applied to all of our allies, our European allies. The unpredictability, the instability, the putting our allies at arm's length has come with a big cost. And so I would say that there's opportunity to right the ship. But right now, I would say that we're in worse shape than we were 14 months ago.
Here in Michigan, independent gubernatorial candidate Mike Duggan has a new problem. His campaign claimed union endorsements he hasn't received. It's a near certainty that the SEIU and the UAW will ultimately endorse Jocelyn Benson. Benson, meanwhile, picked up the endorsement this week of the Michigan Nurses Association. I've got a new neighbor here, Jeff. You may have read that ICE has opened up a regional headquarters next door to my office building and is also opening up a detention center in Romulus. Nobody's happy about this except Stephen Miller, and I openly speculated and predicted this week on social media that this office next to mine is nothing more than a staging area for a massive voter suppression effort in which ICE, the Border Patrol, and other agents of the federal government will participate in here in Michigan.
You know, one thing from this week that I cannot unwatch is the incredibly weird, strange, insane 90-second taxpayer-funded video of RFK Jr. and Kid Rock flexing and sweating and saunaing and push-upping in RFK in jeans doing a cold plunge, apparently to promote physical fitness. RFK thankfully did not include snorting cocaine from a toilet seat as part of his workout regimen, though he has said it has been one in the past.
And I said, I'm not scared of a germ. I used to snort cocaine off of toilet seats.
That was a bizarre video for sure, Jeff. On Tuesday of this week, West Michigan Congresswoman Hillary Scholten went inside the ICE concentration camp. Scholten, who was an immigration attorney before being elected to Congress, joins us later in the podcast to talk about that visit and several other topics.
And as we record on Friday afternoon, the Supreme Court of the United States this morning has overturned most of Trump's tariffs that were instituted in his fits and giggles and whims and dementia this last year. Trump has vented already. He's gone off and made all kinds of comments in a bizarre, insane press conference. Could argue that the court has done him a huge favor since the tariffs are driving much of the economic mess created during Trump's first year back in office. But right now, it's not likely to have any real impact on the trajectory of the economy for the foreseeable future. Mark, let's talk about the passing of someone who played an outsized role in the social and political fabric of our country during the last 60 years, Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, Jeff, it was very sad this week that we lost Jesse Jackson. He really was a remarkable figure, really picked up the mantle of Martin Luther King Jr. after he was assassinated. Obviously, there were other leaders in the civil rights and voting rights movement, but Jesse Jackson was prominent among them. He paved the way, frankly, for many people who came after him, for our first African-American senator from Illinois, Carol Moseley Braun, and even for Barack Obama, ultimately. He paved the way with his two historic presidential runs here in Michigan, ran in both 84 and 88, and pulled a stunning upset in 1988 when in our Democratic caucuses, he beat the favorite, the overwhelming favorite, who was in fact endorsed by Coleman Young, among others, Mike Dukakis. And that was really a stunner, not just for us here in Michigan, but nationally. But it showed the kind of outsized influence that Jackson could have. He gave tremendous speeches at the Democratic National Convention and around the country. Wherever there was a voting rights crisis or a civil rights crisis, Jesse Jackson was there. He really gave a voice to that whole movement during his lifetime, and we're going to miss him.
Mark, I think that was very, very true. Jesse Jackson, it's hard to say how consequential he was over the last, 50 years plus of American history. He was a young leader in the civil rights movement during the 60s, and famously at Martin Luther King's side when he was assassinated in Memphis in April of 1968. In fact, I would urge all of our listeners, if they haven't been to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, it's at the site of the old Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. It's a very, very moving acknowledgement of the slave trade and the Jim Crow era and the fight for civil rights and the fight for equality that we've made great progress in, but that continues to this day. And Jesse Jackson plays a prominent role in that museum.
And Jeff, I think Reverend Jackson would be very proud of us because you and I are helping to keep hope alive in these tough times for democracy. But with that, why don't we talk about the big news? Lots of big news this week. We went through a lot of it already. But let's talk about this tariff decision. Much anticipated. This lawsuit's been working its way through the courts. And to most of us, including the lawyers who brought the case, the law was quite clear. Ultimately, 6 justices on the Supreme Court, I don't know about the other 3, but at least 6 of them said that's right. The president does not have the unilateral authority to impose these tariffs. It's going to cause economic and political chaos. Jeff, well, why don't we talk about the economic and political chaos and what's going to happen now in the wake of this decision?
I've seen some people on social media say that this was a backhanded gift to the Trump administration and the Republicans in Congress who are facing re-election this year as they run for House and Senate control in the fall, control that's increasingly at risk. The House is expected to flip to the Democrats, and the Senate is becoming more likely every day to flip to Democratic control. And so when you look at the now relatively near-term economic and political impacts, it's hard to imagine that there's going to be any real economic change that is felt by voters before the election becomes baked and before their decision on who they're going to vote for or which party they're going to punish is, polls seem to indicate, for their increasing economic anxiety. It seems that, yes, in the long run, this is a great thing for America, for the United States of America, for the Constitution and the rule of law, to say, hey, we have a system. Congress is there for a reason. The president is there for a reason, and the courts are here for a reason. In a concurrent opinion, Neil Gorsuch, one of the very conservative justices appointed by Donald Trump during his first term, gave a good primer on why, if people are frustrated, including Donald Trump, that he can't just impose these tariffs, do what he wants with trade deals and what we charge other countries for importing their goods or services or materials into the United States, it's because the system was designed to prevent him from doing that from the get-go. Congress is deliberative. The House, less so than the Senate, was the design. That it would take time, that the president couldn't just on a whim wake up in the morning and tweet on or post on True Social that he doesn't like something the Canadian Prime Minister or the President of France said about him, and therefore he's going to impose 50 or 75% or 10% or 1% tariffs, whatever. He doesn't have that power. And so that's a good thing for the health of the country in the long run, but I don't think it's going to have any real effect on our economy. This is going to be a huge mess, a huge knot to untie as they figure out what were the hundreds of billions of dollars that were collected largely from American businesses who import and American consumers who buy those products. how is that money that was illegally, improperly collected by the federal government, what's going to happen to that? That's going to be a big problem. It's likely to cause more disruption. It's likely to cause Donald Trump to lash out, as we've seen him already do with a press conference this afternoon. It's likely to cause him to put pressure on the Republicans in the House and in the Senate to pass legislation to give him the authority to do what he wants with the tariffs. In order for the Senate to do that, they would have to do away with the filibuster. They would have to exercise what they call the nuclear option and pass by the sheer majority that they have in the Senate. They couldn't have, risk really any defectors, but they wouldn't, in this case, have to come up with 60 votes to stop something from happening or to pass something. So I think the economic impact is not likely to really be felt this year. The political impact, I don't think we've even seen how strange it will get. We know the economic or the political impact largely from what we've seen in all the election results and now all the polls that we're seeing about Trump's plunging popularity, Trump and the Republicans being so underwater when it comes to economic issues. We know that voters are unhappy with the economy and with the tariffs, and that's not likely to change between now at the end of February and the beginning of November when they vote.
Yeah, Jeff, no, I agree with all of that. First of all, let's make the assumption that I don't make lightly that Trump obeys the Supreme Court order. Let's start with that. These tariffs have been the centerpiece of his economic policy, to the extent you can call it a policy, but also his ability to retaliate against people. Like you said, he wakes up in the morning, he's pissed off because something happened overnight, he slaps a tariff on somebody. It's been the centerpiece of all of that, and that's now gone. So the question is, as you indicated, does he try to get this authority back? Does he try to find some other law under which he thinks he can impose these tariffs unilaterally? So I think he's going to be scrambling around to do that. Let's talk about refunds for a moment. Like you said, hundreds of billions of dollars in refunds plus interest are owed. We've seen Trump take credit for all this tariff income and say, oh, I've reduced the deficit. Well, now these refunds are going to add to the deficit as they are paid out over time. And of course, those refunds aren't going to come to all the consumers, all the second and third level people who process these goods once they came into the States. They're not going to get any refunds. It's just the original payee of those. So that damage is not going to go away. And all the chaos, and we can be specific on this, these tariffs disrupted supply chains. They made, other countries decide we're going to do business with China, we're going to do business with some other country. People have reorganized their businesses in terms of how they access materials and so forth. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I mean, it's just not going to be possible. Maybe eventually after years, but certainly not this year. And so I agree with you. I because of the economic damage and the economic uncertainty, I don't see any political benefit to this for Trump, particularly if he ends up going back to Congress and trying to get authority again. And we're just going to have another tariff fight in the Congress. Hopefully, between the filibuster and a handful of Republicans acting sensibly in the House, as they have recently, he won't get that authority, and we'll have to figure this out. But again, I agree with you. I think it's too late, frankly, in the election season. We were already mid-February for this to have much of an impact other than adding to the chaos that we're already seeing in the political system.
I'm beginning to think this Trump fella might not know what he's doing when it comes to economic policy, with job policy. When you look at his first term, 2017 through the beginning of 2021, he lost more jobs. The U.S. lost more jobs during his 4 years than at any other 4-year period in American history. Not even close. Not even Herbert Hoover in his 4 years in the White House lost anywhere near the number of jobs that Donald Trump did. When his first 13 months in office, now that they've been revising the numbers from 2025, lost jobs since Trump became president. We've lost manufacturing jobs. Not only have his tariffs haven't brought manufacturing jobs to the United States, we've lost manufacturing jobs since Trump was sworn in back in 2025. Everything he's done economically has been wrong, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who objectively looks at Trump's record in business. The man who can bankrupt a casino is working on bankrupting the U.S. economy.
Yeah, Jeff, but as we opened today, we can reflect back on Trump and his cabinet are doing their Orwellian best to change the facts, right, and try to persuade all of us that everything is fine. You know, the economy's great, politically everything is fine, best country we've ever had. But I think, you know, the vast majority of the American people can see that the emperor has no clothes, if I can mix some metaphors.
Ooh,
With that,
that's
why
an
don't we
ugly
introduce
thought. That's
our-
an ugly thought. Ooh.
More on A Republic, if you can keep it, after these messages.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we're here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Hi, Ben Franklin here with a message from our finance department. They've put together a small, exclusive collection of really bitchin' merch for you. We've got our exclusive Trump's Favorite Podcast mug, perfect for those long days of reading through the latest administration indictments. We've got mugs for lovers of sanity, mugs for opponents of dumb fuckery, and finely tailored shirts for lovers of getting dressed. Just head over to the merch store on our website. This square thingy will take you there, or click on the merch store button on arepublicpodcast.com. Support democracy, support freedom, wipe out dumb fuckery. Franklin, out.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve on Michigan's public policy landscape? Look no further than Michigan Information and Research Service Incorporated, or MERS. MERS is your go-to source for comprehensive, nonpartisan news and analysis on Michigan's government and public policy. But that's not all. A MERS subscription also gives you access to our powerful legislative monitoring and tracking tools. Stay on top of every bill, amendment, and vote with real-time updates, detailed reports, interactive committee transcripts, legislative analysis tools, and more. Whether you're a policymaker, lobbyist, or just a concerned citizen, MERS keeps you informed with daily updates, exclusive interviews, and detailed reports. Subscribe today and gain access to our extensive archives. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead with MERS. Visit MERS.news to learn more and subscribe. That's MIRS.news. Don't miss out on the insights that matter most.
We're joined today by Congresswoman Hillary Scholten. Congresswoman Scholten is a fourth-generation West Michigander and Dutch to boot. Prior to her election in 2022, she was an immigration attorney who served in the U.S. Department of Justice. Scholten began her career as a social worker, working with people affected by issues of housing and homelessness. During that time, she worked with individuals in the LGBTQ community who were facing homelessness and housing insecurity, often because of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Congresswoman Scholten obtained her law degree from the University of Maryland Thurgood Marshall School of Law and then went on to clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in their special unit focused on immigration issues. Following her clerkship, she joined the Justice Department through the Attorney General Honors Program, where she continued to work on matters of immigration and civil rights. In her now 2 terms in Congress, she's served on the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the House Committee on Small Business. She talked earlier this week with Mark and our producer, Sorg.
Hillary Scholten, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Good to see you again.
Hi, guys. Good to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And as we said just before we started recording, congratulations. You're no longer in ICE custody.
You know, it was a real gamble. It was a real gamble going there. I wasn't sure if they were going to let me out. You can never be too sure these days.
Was
So
it a surprise visit, Hillary, or
no,
did they know you were coming?
no, we scheduled it in advance. There's a lot of merit to showing up unannounced, but we wanted to make sure that we were going to get access and to make sure that the right people were there to ask the questions that we needed. So we did set it up in advance, and we were glad that we were able to get access. It is our right. It's hard to say grateful, right? Because we are actually entitled to go in and provide that kind of oversight. We know others are not even being afforded, other members of Congress are not even being afforded that basic right. So we were glad that was not denied to us, and we were allowed to visit the facility.
Tell us about what you found. What did you
Yeah.
see? What did you learn?
So I think it's important to remember, the background for why we were doing this. We went, just for context, for those who don't know what we're talking about, yesterday, Congresswoman Haley Stevens and I went to tour the North Lake Processing Center, also known as the Baldwin ICE Detention Center. It is the largest immigration detention center in the state of Michigan, as well as really the Midwest. 1,500 individuals detained there. And unfortunately, at the end of December, an individual lost his life. ICE is claiming it was because of natural causes. Congresswoman Stevens and I led a letter saying, to Kristi Noem saying, give us answers. We didn't get the answers that we needed. And so then we conducted this follow-up visit. We were not able to get satisfactory answers even from this visit. They're still conducting a review. But I will say, there is a state-of-the-art healthcare facility that they have there. So to me, the questions that need to be asked are they being used properly? Are inmates getting access to the care that they need at the time that they need it? We found that there were some inconsistencies in the things that we were being told by ICE leadership, and based on what we have heard from other constituents or family members of individuals who have been detained there. One big example is, whether or not there's usage of a solitary confinement, what a lot of people call the hole. We had been told previously by ICE leadership, there's no such thing as it. Well, we talked to an individual who said, he had spent 3 weeks at a time there, and that it's so cold there, he was wearing triple socks and he still couldn't feel his toes. Inmates are not given sweatshirts. They're given a jacket, a fairly thin jacket that they can wear, and it's both for indoors and out of doors if they're allowed to go out there. We tried to bring in a thermal temperature gauge, which we were told ahead of time we'd be allowed to bring in. But then when we presented with it, they didn't allow us to bring it in the facility with us. We were also told, okay, they might be referring to a behavioral management program. Well, we only have, 1 or 2 detainees that we have to put in a behavioral management program every couple months. Well, independent reporting from the Detroit Free Press found that there were actually 14 individuals that were detained there last month alone in the solitary confinement. So, we are trying as best we can to continue to get the real facts and information coming out of there. We asked that they put up a sign-up sheet for us to be able to talk to individuals that wanted to speak to us. Over 100 people signed up to want to speak to us. We were only allowed to talk to about 4 of them. We asked for interpretation services to be available. When we presented, they were not made readily available. We had to continue to push and then be moved to another room. They weren't made available in all the languages of individuals that we needed to speak to. So that was a real challenge. And I think it just goes to show why we need more members of Congress conducting these oversight visits. The Constitution gives us the power to go and make sure that these facilities are operating within the bounds of law. These are our taxpayer dollars at work. And as the holder of the taxpayer purse, it is incumbent on members of Congress to make sure that these facilities are running, fairly, humanely, and most importantly, legally.
You're the expert in Congress probably on immigration law, at least one of the experts having worked on that issue in the Justice Department. How are the rights of these people being observed or abused in your judgment?
I think one of the things that's really challenging about this, to be honest, Walt, is that there is a real lack of rights available to immigrants. I mean, there still are rights, and I think some of those rights are being curtailed. But part of the problem is that our system of laws treats civil matters and criminal matters quite differently, right? Which they should, because the entire concept of the greater protections under criminal law is that if you're convicted of a crime, or even initially charged with a crime, the state or the government has the right to deprive you of your liberty, right? They can lock you up. In a civil immigration context, there has been a longstanding precedent that those same principles don't necessarily apply because it's civil in nature. I can tell you these individuals who were detained here, certainly were having their liberty deprived. 1,500 individuals who were locked behind bars in what essentially looks, like a maximum security prison, but with less programming. And so, from my perspective, it's yes, there are certain rights that are being curtailed currently, but part of the bigger problem is, the way that the law does not accurately reflect, what this civil detention actually looks like for a lot of these people. And, to those who might say, well, they're not United States citizens, they're not necessarily entitled to the same perspective. We had a case right here in Grand Rapids where this immigration detention happened to a United States citizen, a
Right.
decorated Marine veteran. The problem is you can't tell someone's immigration status just by looking at them. So, you have these cases where United States citizens are detained, lawful permanent residents are detained, people who have the right to be here. I talked to several people yesterday who said, I don't know why I'm here. Here, look at my papers. I'm legal. I don't know why I got locked up. And, they've got to go through the court process. There's no entitlement to a free attorney to help you with your immigration case. So, a lot of people are really struggling to find the representation they need to help them fight their case.
Well, I'd like to turn to another topic that there's lots to talk about here. Tell us about what's going on in your district in terms of the impact of Trump's tariffs.
Oh my goodness.
We've seen a lot of here. I mean, I'm in Eastern Michigan, seeing a lot of the impact here, and we'll get to the bridge in a moment. But tell us about the impact of the tariffs in your congressional district.
I mean, I cannot go to a single small business, medium-sized business throughout West Michigan and hear about the impacts that tariffs are having on them. Two different ways. One, just the absolute rising cost of prices. These blanket unilateral tariffs have made products that we can't make here in Michigan or in the United States completely inaccessible. We've got an exemption on coffee now, but we didn't for a long time, right? And it's like we're not growing coffee here, outside of certain parts of Hawaii. We're not growing coffee in the United States of America. Michigan imports more than $50 billion in Canadian goods and exports $27.5 billion in goods annually. This includes agriculture, energy, equipment, machinery. And so across sectors, we're just really hearing the impact. In our agriculture sector, it's, them feeling the impact of the reciprocal tariffs, right? Certainly importing certain machinery might be more expensive, but they're getting the brunt end of other countries retaliating, saying, okay, well, we're going to raise prices on you. I absolutely want to incentivize the use of American-made, American-built products. I say this all the time. In theory, right, the whole concept of Trump wanting to fight for a better deal for American companies and American workers, who in the world wouldn't get behind that? But it's all about how we do it, right? Using tariffs has to be done in a strategic way, not this, absolute hammer in the way that Trump has been using it. So
he's pissing off the whole world.
He's pissing off the whole world. And, we're undoing a lot of strong trade relationships that have been built up, that require, as an attorney, I got to tell you, you can craft a deal, but there is no way to think of every possible scenario. There is the synergy of trust that matters in these trade relationships. In the United States, the full faith and credit of the United States has been built up over time through trusting partnerships. And Trump is doing a lot to destroy that. So, particularly when it comes to Canada, our largest trading partner here in Michigan, and, the increasing costs, to so many of our businesses is just continuing to hurt our economy. And I hear about it every single day.
Which leads to Mark's next question.
I was going to say, speaking of Canada, the latest threat from Trump is not to let the Gordie Howe Bridge open.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people are saying, well, that's in Detroit. It's in Southeast Michigan. Why should we care about the bridge? That bridge affects commerce in your district, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sure does.
And what kind of impact? I mean, have you heard from businesses who've said, this is nuts, we need that bridge open?
Absolutely. This is, again, just going back to the fact that it's the largest trading partner. This project prioritizes jobs and commerce that benefits the entire state, not just ours. We need more than one lane heading into and out of Canada there. And it's all public information now. We know exactly who was at the White House right before Trump started threatening to shut this project down. And it is so antithetical to our American values of competition, transparency, fairness, openness. American consumers are going to pay the price, right? Because the less competition there is, the more of a stranglehold, a narrow funnel for these goods to get through, the more expenses, the more delay, and the more consumers are going to be paying. So yes, we've absolutely been hearing from businesses here. I, was so proud to join with our Democratic delegation in leading a letter pushing back to Trump. I was shocked that we couldn't get any of our Republican colleagues to join us on that letter. This impacts businesses in their district as well. And, this is not a time for partisan games or being afraid to stand up to the president and say, hey, this isn't about paying off access to America for the highest bidder. We need to make sure that we have, open trade and, free flowing commerce back and forth via this bridge, which has been a signature issue for Michigan for decades, right? And now, right as we're on the cusp, he's threatening to shut everything down. So
Canada paid for the whole thing.
And right. And that's the thing. He wants to talk about getting a good deal, right? We got Canada to pay for the entire thing. So what he's actually able to do in terms of shutting it down is fairly limited. I mean, we do need federal workers standing there at the ports, the inspection workers. There's certainly chaos and damage that he could cause, but we're not talking about, federal tax dollars that he can suddenly cut off. This was a great deal for Michigan and the United States because Canada paid for the entire thing.
And we own half of it, right? Even after all that.
Right.
Didn't you and some of your Democratic colleagues sponsor legislation about
yes,
the
that's
bridge
what I was
as well?
saying. I led legislation with my Democratic colleagues to try and stop Trump from doing this. Again, specifically saying, because there's nothing that we can do about the federal dollars because it's Canada's investment. However, there are Customs and Border Protection agents that would need to be stationed there, port workers who would need to be stationed there in order for the bridge to function. So, what I think Trump was threatening is by executive order to say that those individuals couldn't go there. However, those people are paid through congressional appropriations. So what we were trying to do is saying, Trump can't unilaterally do this, and let's introduce legislation saying he can't just suddenly stop this. And again, we didn't get a single Republican to join us in that effort, which is significant.
You work on a lot of infrastructure issues, and it seems as though a standard Trump tactic is to use infrastructure money to get other policy changes that have nothing to do with infrastructure.
It's true.
And generally define what Congress has already approved and has already been signed into law.
The rescissions that we've seen from these infrastructure packages in the Trump administration has just been obscene. It's costing more money to try and roll this back, huge delays in projects. I had a meeting with a lot of our building trades and the laborers talking about projects that they have had impacted, and they're like, we don't know what to do. We've already invested, a lot of the time in the design work. The project is moving forward. He loves to brag about all the money that he's saving and clawing back, but so much of that has already been appropriated in a way that people were planning on it, and clawing it back is actually going to be more costly because these are infrastructure projects that were needed, that are bringing important jobs to Michigan. Families rely on them to put food on the table.
And at the same time, he's spending hundreds of millions of dollars to keep open obsolescent coal plants, right?
Campbell.
It just is
Right,
just
Campbell, right here
incoherent.
in West Michigan. Again, just speak about the uncertainty, right? This coal plant, I was there, about 5 days before it was supposed to shut down. And there they had, this tiny pile of coal, a 5-day supply. All the workers had already been given, their marching orders. This plant, they could produce 10 times the amount of energy in a space a fraction of the size with the new technology that we have, not to mention cleaner, more environmentally friendly. And for political reasons and, quote, anti-woke ideology, legislators got together and said, nope, let's get to the Trump administration and force that plant to go back online. But we're only going to do it by 30-day executive order. So you only have 30 days to plan, and you don't know if you're going to, continue to operate beyond that 30 days. No business in their right mind can operate, let alone one the size of, a massive coal power plant on a 30 days notice. So it's the instability, it's the chaos, the lack of planning. It's all very costly.
Speaking of cost, affordability is the issue of the day, as it should be, across the board around the country. What are you hearing from your constituents? Energy prices, food prices, across the board, affordability problems?
Yep. It's the number one issue. I would say every week, we monitor our incoming mail, our incoming phone calls, and I get a readout, and I read the letters, I hear what the constituents have to say. And the top issue is around affordability issues, whether it's housing, the cost of groceries, the cost of healthcare. Obviously, now that the ACA tax credits have expired, and only recently has immigration eclipsed that. People just feeling like our country is out of control, ICE has too much power, et cetera. I talk to people every single day who are talking to me about, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford my next mortgage payment, my next rent payment. And we're not talking about the poorest of the poor. We're talking about people who used to consider themselves middle class, upper middle class. They don't know how they're going to pay for college. And what people don't realize, I think, is that the one big beautiful bill that passed this summer, we obviously know it was devastating for a lot of reasons, the SNAP cuts, the Medicaid cuts, but it was the largest wealth redistribution in American history, even more so than the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017, where, here we're talking about close to 80% of the benefits going to the top 0.1% in the country. The Affordable Care Act premium tax credits would save, people in my district, like on average, it was saving people, like $2,000 a year, hundreds of dollars, a month. This one big beautiful bill, the tax cut redistribution, provided an additional $700 a day in tax benefits to the top 0.1%, just because, not because of healthcare. Consider that. We can't find the money to help, seniors who have retired but are not yet eligible for Medicare, small business owners, 26-year-olds who age out of their parents' insurance, but they don't yet have employer-provided insurance. These are the people who rely on the Affordable Care Act tax credits. We can't find the money to support these individuals, right, at a critical and vulnerable time in life. But yet we can find $700 a day for the world's 0.1% richest people in the United States of America, it's unconscionable. Everybody's still talking about, well, it's going to trickle down. Well, we're all still waiting, right? I don't feel a trickle. I don't even feel a drop.
It's been trickling since the Reagan administration.
That's still the line. And the wealth gap just keeps growing. People are putting groceries on their credit cards. There's more credit card debt today, in a single family than there was in, 100 families 10 years ago. The statistics are astounding, and people are just struggling every day to get by. It's why I founded a caucus in Congress called the Lowering Cost Caucus. We are an idea shop to help bring forward ideas that will help lower costs for Americans, because I think what people are really tired of is Democrats just complaining about how things are, and the only thing they say is like, not Trump, right? Try to talk about how terrible Trump is. They want us to have solutions. Well, I'm a policy nerd. Let's talk about solutions. So the Lowering Cost Caucus is an idea shop where we come up with ideas, everything from housing to healthcare to groceries, price capping, making sure you don't pay too much when you want to take your family out to a concert or a Lions game, for crying out loud. One of the signature bills that I've introduced here is my Tri-Share bill, which is nationalizing the program that we have here in Michigan, cutting childcare costs by a third. Not only is this a huge price tag for so many working families in Michigan, but it costs the economy billions in lost wages every year for families who can't afford to work because childcare is too expensive. I remember as a young attorney with two small kids, daycare for babies, kids under a year, is so much more expensive. And I would talk about paying for the privilege of working, right? That's what it felt like. I got to keep up in my career. So one day, you can get a promotion, you get a higher wage, but the math just doesn't math when you're paying for two little ones in childcare. So we want to change that. Michigan has been a leader in that. We want to bring it nationwide, and that would also help Michigan by bringing additional federal resources to the program that they already use. So we got a lot of great ideas. We're going to continue rolling them out and making sure that families that are struggling to get by know that they have somebody in Congress that sees them and is truly fighting for them. I know what it's like, and I mean, I've got a public servant salary, but it's still, a fairly decent salary. But I'm telling you, trying to raise two kids in this economy, in this day and age, is not cheap. So I feel it too.
I do the grocery shopping in our family and just filled out the order this morning and was in shock again. I'd like to get into the politics a little bit. You were really a leader in the transition of Southwest Michigan from rock-solid Republican. Heck, you represent Jerry Ford's former congressional district. What is bringing about this shift? What has caused it to move more towards Democrats?
I think there's a couple things happening. And one, thank you. It has been a goal of mine to help usher in this blue wave. But, obviously, there have been so many incredible leaders who have been doing this work before me as well. Of course, we have our great Senate Majority Leader, Winnie Branks, a true leader and champion. We've got fantastic leadership at the state level. Carol Glanville also flipped a really important seat here too. So, I am proud of the work that we've done, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about all the incredible people who have been organizing here for so long and really helping to turn the tide. I think there's two things happening in West Michigan. One is population growth. West Michigan is growing exponentially. There's all kinds of new young people, especially between the ages of 18 and 35, moving here. They're younger, they're more progressive voters. But to me, the bigger and more interesting thing that is happening is really like my story and why I felt like I could run and win here. I was born and raised here in West Michigan. I did not know a Democrat until I was a senior in high school. Honest to God's truth. I was raised in conservative CRC West Michigan. I was like, do you have to get a special dispensation from Synod to be a Democrat? I didn't know. I wasn't sure. But you don't, it turns out. But, it is, they kind of look at you funny. But that the old model of Republican, the Gerald Ford Republican, the Milliken Republican, Paul Henry, Vern Ehlers, these moderate, compassionate conservative, where the compassionate really did mean something, right? The people who fell in that bucket, they've seen what has become of today's Republican Party, and they say, that's not what I stand for. I stand for fiscal responsibility. I stand for caring for my neighbor. And particularly around some more culturally sensitive issues like LGBTQ rights and abortion, I know there's a lot of people who are courageous in saying, you know what? I've never really thought about that issue in a certain way, and I'm thinking about it in a new way now. Maybe they have a kid who is gay or trans, and they're like, now I'm forced to confront this issue in a personal way that I never had to before. But they're changing their hearts and minds, even as the Republican Party moves farther and farther away. And I've really found that I've been able to speak into my own experience and connect with a lot of people who say, I feel the same way too. This party is not one that speaks for me. My values are more aligned here. Maybe not with everything the Democratic Party stands for, but we do stand for compassion, for caring for your neighbor. And I think especially on, some of the more traditional fiscal responsibility and economic issues, let's be honest, today's Republican Party does not have a corner on those issues.
Right.
The one big beautiful bill added over $1 trillion to the federal debt. And that's not lost on people who pay attention to that kind of thing. And for what, right? Handouts to the top 0.1%. It's not like we're making our public schools better.
With that, why don't we call it a wrap? I know you've got a lot of things on your agenda, even though basically in the House you don't get anything done, thanks to our illustrious Speaker of the House.
I wish we could. It's not for trying. I will give a plug and say I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish from the minority. We have been the first minority party in history that has pushed major policy votes from a position of the minority through discharge petition, from the Epstein files
petition.
to the actually forcing a vote on the ACA tax credit extensions. So, wresting away this issue on tariffs, that Republicans thought they were going to get some big win on. It's a single vote majority right now. So we're working hard. And boy, oh boy, I can't wait till it's an actual majority for us.
Yeah, you're about one flu epidemic away from a majority.
I wish no one ill.
Well, good luck on your reelection, and we
Thank
hope you
you.
will be part of a Democratic House majority next cycle.
It'd be nice. Thank you guys so much. It was great to see you.
Good
Great.
to see you
Thanks.
again, too. Thank
Good
you.
to talk to
Bye.
you. Take care. Before we wrap up this week, some words about the passing of someone else who had a major influence on Michigan politics and policy for his entire life, but someone you've probably never heard of. Bill Ganacki spent 18 years on the staff of the Michigan House Republican Caucus, including 2 years as its executive director, and he later served as finance director for the Michigan Republican Party. In 1988, he founded Notke and Associates, a fundraising and political consulting firm that worked for and with Republican candidates and cases across the state.
Bill's party involvement ran deep. He was a presidential elector from Michigan for Gerald Ford in 1976. He served as state party treasurer and remained active for more than 30 years as a precinct delegate and county party officer in both Ingham and Clinton counties. He also served on the Michigan Board of State Canvassers and as a Clinton County Commissioner, in addition to holding roles on township, county, and regional planning commissions. After retiring to northern Michigan back in 1997, Bill began a 21-year tenure on the Mackinac Bridge Authority, one of his true passions, including 16 years as chair. Appointed and reappointed by Governors John Engler, Jennifer Granholm, and Rick Snyder, he was known as a steady advocate for the bridge's operational and financial autonomy. Bill was a mentor. He became a friend, somebody I just think was a hell of a guy. Our sincere condolences to his wife of 56 years, his 2 sons, his grandchildren, including 2 that he tragically lost to a rare genetic disease. Something he spent a long time talking to me about and makes my heart ache now just thinking about it. Bill was 87 years old. He was one of the good guys. He'll be missed.
And with that remembrance of one of Michigan's political giants, we're done for this week. Our great thanks to Congresswoman Hillary Scholten for the latest news in the immigration enforcement wars.
A reminder to get your free subscription to our YouTube channel. We need to catch up with Colbert. Click on the link on our website, arepublicpodcast.com, to subscribe.
And we'll leave you this week with another quote from 1984. If you want to picture the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. On that ominous note, we bid you adieu for this week.
If the Republic is still standing, Mark and I will return next week. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a copyrighted presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.